Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This session is going to be an introduction to the articulation points. First, let's take a trip into the human vocal system to examine how sounds are created and learn about the Arabic letters, articulation points, and characteristics. When we exhale, the air we breathe out moves from the lungs up the windpipe or trachea and through the larynx over here, or the voice box, which is the respiratory tract portion containing the two vocal cords which produce sound. The air which passes through the vocal cords causes them to vibrate and create sound. This vibration can be either strong or weak, and the cords can be either close together, as we can see here, or apart. These four factors play a significant role in how the sound is created, as we will see later on. When we are not talking, the air we exhale comes out naturally through the vocal cords that are open. But because they are completely relaxed, the airflow does not cause them to vibrate and remains just a breath, nafas, without creating sounds. We say that this breath came out naturally, بدافع الطبع, without relying on any articulation points. However, when we talk, we rely on articulation points which draw a certain amount of breath we exhale to move from the lungs to the larynx and to the vocal cords, causing them to vibrate with a particular strength, and the vocal cords either close up completely or partially or open up. This process modulates the airflow into audible sound waves. Just like how ripples modulate in circles when you throw a pebble into the water, the air we breathe out modulates into audible sound waves. We say that this breath came out by one's own volition. أي بدافع الإرادة. When this happens, either all of the exhaled air will modulate into sound waves, or some of the air will modulate into sound waves and the rest will remain a breath, nafas. Now, where does the exhaled air go to? After the exhaled air leaves the vocal cords, either as a sound with little breath or without any, it continues its trip to the throat. So as we said earlier, the journey begins from the lungs, up the trachea, to the larynx where the vocal cords are, and then to the throat. The throat, al-halq, has three parts. The closest part, adna al-halq, which is closest to the lips, the middle part, and the deepest part. Then this air passes by the tongue, al-lisan. It passes by the oral and throat cavities, or the empty space in the throat and mouth, highlighted in yellow. This part is known as al-jawf. It carries on to the two lips, al-shafatan, and it could also travel to the nasal cavity, over here, al-khayshum, which is responsible for the nasalization, al-ghunna, that accompanies the noon and mim. And so, during our journey, we have seen how the air travels by 5 articulation points, خمس makharij: the throat, the tongue, al-jawf, the two lips, and the nasal cavity. These 5 articulation points are known as the general or the major articulation points, Makharij amma. Each major articulation point is then subdivided into one or more minor articulation points, Makharij khassa. There are 17 minor articulation points in total. Each minor or detailed articulation point can produce one or more letters, حرف واحد أو أكثر. For example, the throat, al-halq, is a major articulation point, مخرج عام, and it's subdivided into 3 detailed articulation points, makharij khassa, which produce 2 letters each. Also, the tongue is a major articulation point, makhraj عام, that is made up of 10 minor articulation points, makharij khassa. Some produce only 1 letter, as we can see here, and others produce 3 letters. The lips, al-shafatan, constitute a major articulation point. مخرج عام, which is subdivided into two minor articulation points. One produces one letter and the other produces three letters. الجوف is a major articulation point and consists of one minor articulation point, which produces the three lengthened letters حروف المد, the alif sakina preceded by a fatha, waw sakina preceded by a dhamma, and ya sakina preceded by kasra. Finally, the nasal cavity, al-khayshum, is a major articulation point which consists of one minor articulation point that produces the nasalization. Now, if the articulation point is tangible, like the throat, the lips, and the tongue, we say this is a specific articulation point, makharij muhaqqaq. Why? Because to pronounce the letter, you need to rely on a specific place. For example, when we say ab, we find that the lips collide to give us this sound. So we call it a specific articulation point, makharij muhaqqaq. However, if the articulation point is a wide area with no specific spots for us to rely on in order to produce the sound, we call it an approximate articulation point, makharij muqaddar, which is the case with al-jawf and the nasal cavity. In brief, the specific articulation points are the throat, the tongue, and the lips, whereas the approximate articulation points, which are too spacious to rely on when producing letter sounds, are al-jawf and the nasal cavity. So, to conclude, what do we mean by breath? Breath refers to the exhalation air that comes out naturally with the vocal cords completely relaxed. What is the definition of sound? Alsawt, it is an audible breath that comes out by one's own volition. In other words, breath comes out involuntarily, while sound is caused voluntarily by relying on an articulation point. What is an articulation point? Al-makharij. An articulation point is the place of emitting the letter when pronouncing it that differentiates that specific letter from other letters. Then, what is a letter? Harf. A letter is a sound that relies on a specific or approximate articulation point. Okay, so now that we know that there are 5 major articulation points, can we name them? What are they? They are the throat, the tongue, al-jawf, the lips, and the nasal cavity. Each major articulation point consists of one or more minor articulation points. So what do we mean by a minor articulation point? Makharij khas. It is a detailed articulation point that can produce one or more letters. So what is the difference between a specific and an approximate articulation point? المخرج المحقق والمخرج المقدر. The difference is that a specific articulation point relies on a specific place of the areas of the throat, tongue, or the two lips. The sound stops where the specific articulation point ends. On the other hand, the approximate articulation point does not rely on a specific place of the areas of the throat, tongue, or the two lips. It is applied to the 3 lengthened letters, huruf al-mad, which are pronounced from the empty space in the mouth and the throat, and the nasalization characteristic associated with the noon and meme, which comes from the nasal cavity. This is where our session ends. Until next time.